Hey everyone, welcome to week 18, day 1. For this week, we're just going to work with very simple palettes, 3 color palettes. And 2 of those colors are going to be complementaries. So that's what we're going to call it, complementaries and question mark. Because our aim is just to see if, for example, today, a red and a green are going to be a good match. And sometimes they're going to be good matches and sometimes they're not. So this week we're exploring that. Let's see how we do. Okay, let's get started. For this week, and I think I made it a point to do that last week, and I'm going to try to keep doing this, if it's possible, of course, which is trying to build up from the lessons that I've learned from last week, from past weeks. So I think the lesson I got from last week was the fact that simplicity is always best for me. Again, I should always preface everything that I say that this is what works for me. I don't expect it to work for everyone else. I think that what I'm hoping to do with all these efforts that we are putting together with Danny is that people embark in their own journeys, and the answers that they can come up with are their own. They belong entirely to them and to all the variables that have shaped their lives. So for me, one of the things that is solidifying with the pass of time is the fact that I'm more attracted to simplicity, to less variables in my painting practice. And that was very true for last week. I started using one brush and I realized how very little I needed the other brushes, if it came down to it. I also realized that when they come together, they are absolutely beautiful. But in reality, I don't need a ton of brushes to exalt the fundamentals of painting. So because I was thinking of the very few things I need, I thought, well, we haven't really done very short palettes here. The shortest we've gone is 4 colors. So we've done variations of Zorn palettes. We've done titanium white, yellow ochre, cad red, and black. And we've done a more earthy palette with titanium white, yellow ochre, terra rosa, and ivory black. So I wanted to see if we could shorten that palette even more. And the way we're going to do that is by working with complementary colors. Now, complementaries are sort of strange. They're quite abstract because what they actually do is try and bring out the best of each other. And again, this is so very hard to put into words because the concept of colors is very strange to us. We have nominated colors based on the visible light spectrum, right? So we've called one area of that wavelength red and another area orange and another area yellow, purple, so forth. And we tie that definition with things that we see in nature. So, very simple example is roses are red. So we understand the reddish quality of color because they echo things that are visible to us in nature. Now, to say that green could, in a way, exalt the qualities of redness, it starts sounding a little bit strange, but that's exactly what happens with complementary colors, which are the colors that are opposing each other in the color wheel. Now, remember, we've mentioned this before, but our color wheel, our understanding of the color wheel, is actually fairly new. So before that, we were even trying to define which were the primary colors. Now we're kind of set in understanding that our primaries are yellow, red, and blue, and that based on those primaries, we constructed a wheel where 2 colors, which are the ones that we're going to use today, are opposing each other. So what does that mean that they oppose each other? Because we all hear about complementary colors, but very seldomly we put them to good use. Like I said, the most important part is that when they are put right next to each other, they bring out their inherent qualities. I know this is very strange, but that's how our brain works. That's how our perception works. If we humans, and we have to specify this, that this solely works for us. This is for us humans. This is how our perception has been shaped throughout hundreds of thousands of years. So whenever we see something red right next to something green, we are aware of its redness or we are aware of its greenness. And that is probably the most fascinating quality about complementary colors. The other thing that is actually practical when being used in our painting practice is the fact that when you mix together these two pigments, when they come together, not when they're just right next to each other or one on top of the other, but when they actually mix, when you take a red pigment and mix it with its complementary, with a green, they cancel each other out. And this is where, pardon the pun, there's a very gray area. You would suppose that every time any red pigment, be it a red orange or a red violet, comes in contact with any green, be it a green yellow or a green blue, then what you would get is just this perfect neutral, a perfect gray, because they are canceling each other. And that is not the case. That is so not the case. There's only very, very few specific relationships between pigments where that sort of happens. It doesn't happen like beautifully or perfectly. I've always said that the neutral that you get when you mix complementaries is not quite a perfect neutral. It's not a neutral that you can get when you're mixing it with, let's say, a very neutral earth tone. Earth tones are neutral by nature. So think about them as having the ability to gray out a mixture without having the color that is being grayed out lose its hue or shift its hue. So a red will remain red while it's being grayed down. Now, this doesn't happen when you gray down a red with a green. It actually tends to shift its hue a little bit. So you're not going to get this really nice hue of red throughout the act of graying it down. What you're going to get is a tiny shift where it becomes greener. Now, it is very weird to say, how does a red become greener? Like, how does that path go? Because if you think about the color wheel as being something that has to be traveled, then you realize, oh my God, they're not close to each other. They're actually opposing each other. So they have to cross half of the color wheel to get to where the other one is. And in that traversing of the color wheel, there's a ton of graying out. But the beautiful thing about the grays that come out of mixing complementary colors is that they actually have a hue to them. So you're never going to get, again, like a very neutral gray. Don't think of it like let's say, like a Payne's gray or a Castle earth mixed with a little bit of white that makes a fairly coolish but kind of neutral gray. Or some of the darker raw umbers that I like, which I think of them as a very, very neutral earth. No, what you're going to get is a gray that is going to have the tendency to go either way. So you're going to get a gray red or a gray green. But there's always going to be like a slight tint, like a slight echo of the dominant color of that mix. So if you're mixing more red than green, you're going to get a grayish red. If you're mixing more green than red, you're going to get a grayish green. And it's always going to be like that. And you're always going to be conscious of that dominance in that mixture, of what color is more prevalent than the other. So that is very important to note, because we sometimes have the expectation of these two colors coming together and canceling each other out like perfectly, and that's not the case. And here comes the way more complicated part. That is one that we're going to explore actually, and which is kind of cool, which is which two specific pigments are actually very nice complementaries. Now, I am not going to do this throughout this week. So this week, instead of being called like complementaries, we could call it complementaries. Something like, I don't know, that's a question mark in there. But we are just going to take a red and a green and try to see how well they work together. So today I'm going to work with what is basically like a cad red dark, like a darker cad red. So it's not really a red orange. It's kind of stepping a little bit away from the orange hue. And it's almost like right in the middle. And we're going to use a cinnabar green. And cinnabar green tends to be a little bit yellow. This one's kind of earthier. We have two colors that seem to be, in terms of value, close to each other. The red is probably a bit more saturated than that green. Also, in terms of value, they are not super dark. So when we work with them, what we're going to get is a mixture that is sacrificing contrast, right? Because none of these two colors are actually value 0 in our value scale. So we're never going to get a super dark dark. So our darkest value is just going to be either the combination of the two of them or whatever value the darkest one of these two pigments is. That's it. That's going to be our darkest dark, and we have to accept that. So the palette that we're going to use today is going to be that sort of cadmium red deep, that cinnabar green, which is like a mid-tone, earthy green, and titanium white. That's all we're going to use for this palette. So we're going to have 3 colors. And we're going to do this to put to test how these two colors behave with each other. You know, we always hear red and green, red and green. Well, let's pick one red and one green. And this is not haphazardly, like I thought about this. And tomorrow we're going to pick a different red and a different green, and we'll see how very different the painting can be. But we're going to see what happens when we mix these two together, and we're also going to see how each of these pigments behaves with white. So I wanted to start with the relationship between these particular two hues because it is a super, super important relationship in painting history. I mean, if you really think about the greenness and the redness of color, it's almost impossible not to think about early Renaissance painting. And when I'm talking about early Renaissance, I'm talking about 13th century. So there were paintings done by Cimabue or Duccio, Madonna paintings, where at that point they already knew that if you had a green underpainting and you slowly glazed areas of red on top of it, it would make that color just come to life, and literally come to life. That was the expression of liveliness. That was the way you would evoke a spirit inside a body being alive, just by having a rosy cheeks and a rosy nose, just a kind of pinkish forehead, pinkish chin, a little bit of blood on your fingertips. That was being alive. And it was amazing because they also understood that the lack of that redness, the lack of that glazing of that red, of that warm color on top of that green would mean death. So every time they would paint the entombment of Christ or the crucifixion of Christ, they would refrain themselves from using that red because they wanted to express how the life was being drawn out. So a lot of those paintings that depict Christ dead, they have this lack of redness, and all they use is a sort of greenish underpainting. That was amazing. The fact that they realized, even though this is almost like primitive painting, the fact that they realized that there was a play between these two colors that could express that life was injected to them was incredible. And all of this is based upon the relationship between green and red. And when I was thinking about this, I was transported immediately to a painting of a painter that I'm not really, fond of, Nicolas Poussin, the French Baroque painter. I've never really liked his paintings. Never, ever, ever. In fact, I'm way more of a Simon Vouet fan. I think Vouet is a fantastic French painter. Now, both of these painters, Poussin and Vouet, they were French, but they were also kind of Italian because they actually spent a ton of their lives in Italy until they were summoned back to France. But French painting doesn't have quite an identity during the Baroque time. So a lot of these French painters were studying and were living in Italy. And Vouet is one of those. And he is very Caravaggio. His job was to bring a lot of the Italian Baroque style of painting into France. He's almost like solely responsible for doing that. But Poussin was a little bit different. He was a very classical painter, so he wanted to bring back everything that he thought was the highest form of painting, which was Raphael. That's not the reason that I don't connect that much with Poussin. If you ask me, I'm way more of a Caravaggio fan than a Raphael fan. So, I would probably be team Simon Vouet, but let me get back to my story. I saw a Poussin painting at the Prado in Madrid. And it was the Triumph of David. And I could care less about the whole of the painting. There's a bunch of stuff going on. But all I could see when I spotted this painting was a navel. And it's this particular navel that I'm going to show right now. And, even though this is a wonderful picture, it doesn't do the painting justice. Not at all. What I wanted to showcase is that the pinkness of that navel is just incredible. I mean, it's one of the most exquisite moments of painting that I've ever seen. And it's because Poussin, who was obviously a capable painter, I'm not trying to take away anything from his ability just by saying that I don't like him that much. But the way he just modeled that abdomen is so masterful. The fact that he would control all the greenish grayness in this abdomen, he was able to model that form just so that he could slightly hint that pinkish hue right as the navel is turning and coming into light. It's just insane. I mean, that is some of the most incredible painting I've ever seen. And if you think about it, it's just a navel, it's just an abdomen, it's just a belly button. But it floored me. I was like, okay, you are an absolute master. This is absolutely incredible. But like I said, this consciousness of the greenness of something being there so that you could showcase the pinkness of something. Let's remember, pinkness, why would the green showcase the pink, like the pink being the important one? Because pinkness was live. Pinkness meant that you were alive, that there was, blood running through your veins, that your body was warm. So it's almost like the green is doing all the hard work. The green underpainting is doing all the hard work just so that the warmness and the pinkness can steal all the show. And like I said, this wasn't new. Poussin was painting during the 17th century. So he was painting in the 1640s and 50s. But like I said, with Cimabue and Duccio, they were doing Madonna paintings where they were doing exactly the same thing with color 350 years earlier almost. So that's insane. We've had this knowledge of color, of what color can do, for hundreds of years. And painters have initially, intuitively, done all these exercises because I've said it many times before, but they had so very few colors at their disposal that they had to be super inventive. They really had to push and see, how these colors could work well when they were put together. So the point of this week is going to be just to try and see why these relationships, or if these relationships work, and how one of these pigments is actually bringing out the best of the other. Are the pigments that I choose going to be perfect relationships in the sense that they are perfect complementaries and they really showcase the best of each other? No, because that's not really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to see, if these colors, if a red and a green, if an orange and a blue, if a purple and a yellow actually can come together and create harmony and can do something that can feel like a painting that is not being limited by the fact that they can't be perfect complementaries if that's the case. So I'm super excited about what this week is going to be about. For this painting, I was super happy that I accepted the fact that the value scale was going to shift. So I wasn't going to have a ton of contrast, but what I was gaining was atmosphere. So I wanted to see if I could almost like float in and out of that grayness of these two colors coming together, and then suddenly one area being greener, one area being pinker, specifically the hand being green dominant and the face being pink dominant. And then where the two would meet would be the shadow mass that would travel towards the hair, and there you would have this greenish, grayish, orangish color that was the product of the two of them coming together. So I'm super excited about the possibilities that doing this exercise has to offer, because sometimes we have colors in our palette that we've never ever put together, and this is a perfect chance to just say, hey, I'm going to pick you two. And even though these two colors are not really part of my palette, this is awesome for me and very eye-opening, because I'm going to pick two colors that I have, two tubes of paint that I have sitting around, and I'm going to say, hey, let me bring you two together and let's see what we can do with you two. So that's what we're going to do throughout this week. Like I said, we're going to do a repeat, but you're going to see that it's going to be a completely different painting, because we're going to pick a completely different red and green. So the result is going to be astonishingly different. Thank you for hanging out today, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.